All right. Welcome, everyone. How's it going in the back? Welcome to the second installment of our creative writing reading series. Last week we had Amaranth Orsic here. She blew her mind, and now tonight it's going to be Susan Briante. But first, we're going to have Whitney Curtis. I'm going to bring her up in just a second. But please silence your cell phones, do whatever you have to do with that technology. Keep it quiet so we can just have an awesome poetic experience tonight. And with that said, Whitney Curtis, everyone, give it up.
Hello. I am Whitney Curtis, and I'm a second year MFA student here. And I'm very honored to be reading for Susan Briante tonight as a little warm up for her. And I'm very excited to hear her speak, so I'm going to try to not take up too much time and just get down to it. The first poem I'm going to be reading is entitled Downlit. Our mortality enters with arms raised as we take turns at springing from a shared nightmare. Felled sky turns the bed into a room of back doors, my voice blanketing darkness without form, and your density a pitted boat carried towards no horizon. Voiceless intentions, unfiltered time. Here we confront every possibility at once, trace each other's figure like history's epitaph. You look so strange in daylight, an ashtray cradling dead embers. Cut into intro. Pull the city down over our eyes like heaven's slip tripped out of. You were never actualized outside of language, but it's dawn when the skyscrapers bleed up trumpets and you enter stage through wires as swoonful hand in slow waking. How can I not put this into frame? Climax is easiest with prearranged dialogue and only one of us present. If by chance you ever manifest to gut and trail, don't. Keep towards me as pickled destiny, my was-bloom in your hand. Bevy of swans. Being a woman of multiple bags, I may not have anything. When portability really means lack of capacity and regional distance circulates to sex. But the guy enters the scene headless, and I remember myself differently. I want this gathering of late-night commuters to have a name like nearing the edge of Earth before it was round. I forget things I travel with on benches, spread over cities like the clicking end of a film reel. Downturned to mind. Night loses reference, and I get a close-out longing that shakes the mind, white flag. A bad solicit left on the voicemail. I don't blame Mother for screening my calls again when recital of greetings sounds like apology, turns our hands over to reveal nothing at play. How to record loneliness I can force into whatever room she is in, like splinter in the landscape. Confession expires ahead of sound. There are no words to unshed my bloom. And the last one I'm going to read for you tonight is entitled Facial Sap. Gathered at the bus terminal and no one will dance. Swollen fields die, we crows dive hard like bent knees on a tree limb. Girl hanging, curtains in a dollhouse, dead song. A man shakes his pant leg off, and I want it with one hand gripping the bedpost. And then again, no. What I want is to stretch everyone's mouths out of frame, take my hands off when the spot lights up. Thank you. I'm more excited to introduce Susan Briante, though. I was lucky enough to have Susan Briante as my professor at the University of Arizona, and I took her class every chance I had, and perhaps this is because I became early on a huge fan of Susan's pioneering work, her philosophy on writing, and her enduring relationship with poetry that I wanted so badly for myself. She is a teacher, a translator, a writer of 3 books, and much more, but perhaps Susan's real triumph as a poet is her ability to push poetry and language into conversation with a world that is increasingly focused on progress, accessibility, and commodity. As much of Susan's interest of study revolves around experimental autobiography, documentary, and effect theory, her newest book, The Market Wonders, which was a finalist for the National Poetry Series, seems to be, in a way, Susan's own small manifesto. I had the opportunity to get some insight on the drive behind this lyric investigation of the economic system that focuses so heavily on documentation, measurement, and relation to the individual's lived experience. And what I thought most interesting in our conversation was Susan's concern with the relationship between the nation and the poet. When asked how the poet, and larger still poetry itself, survives in a world focused on measured value, Susan replied, "Some people want to see poetry as something untarnished by certain political, economic, or social concerns. And I think it's important to consider poetry, or art in general, as a refuge, a place for reimagining reality." And that is exactly what Susan's work accomplishes. It is a response to that ever-changing world, one which demonstrates courage to respond to that world as it is now, reveal additional information about what persists through time, and find the strength to imagine what else could be. One quote in particular that I like to leave with is when Susan said to me, as she does to her own students now, that in the face of an economy that puts so little value on poetry, the act of writing the poem or making art of any kind is an act of resistance. And I must say that as a young, struggling poet, that idea is very comforting to know that every time we pick up our pens to write, we are in some way little badasses. So on that note, please help me welcome the rebel herself, Susan Briante.
It's really hard to be a badass when you're like away for tears from your eyes because somebody just gave you a nice introduction. Thank you so much, Whitney. It was such a pleasure to hear your work. Clearly, Colorado suits you. And where can I put this where I will injure nothing? Okay, it's really, really great to be here in this long room. Hello, back there. Can you hear me back there? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, English department, grad students, everyone who makes these endeavors possible. Yeah, it's really nice to see such a full room on a random, kind of warm Tuesday night in Colorado, in the middle of an election season, etc., etc. All the other reasons why coming and listening to a poetry reading is kind of an act of rebellion too, or an extra credit assignment, which is totally cool as well. How many people here are poets, or doing some poetry? Okay, kind of that, yeah. I'm asking because I have work that's kind of this, like the first piece I'm going to read, and I think it's a prose poem, but it could be an essay, a manifesto, and I'm happy to talk about why I might want to call it a prose poem, but I think I'm not interested in some kind of purity of genre more than if I call it a poem, maybe that makes you think of a certain history of poetry as opposed to if I say this is an essay or something. But even before I get to that first piece, I'm going to just say a few things about this project in general. So, The Market Wonders, the poems I started writing in response to the economic crisis of 2008. And some of you who had me in class today heard a little bit of this, so this is a good time to zone out for a few minutes if you need a break. But I'll say it again. Part of what I was interested in at the time was first how the economic crisis was being discussed in terms of the reporting by the media. We put a lot of emphasis when we talk about economics in this particular country on the stock market. Every day, most news organizations will report the closing number of several stock market indices, including the Dow Jones Industrial Average. And it struck me that, not every news organization lists, even in a time of war, for example, the names of the soldiers who've been reported who were deceased, right? The stock market, that's always there. So I was paying attention to that kind of, why is that the most important index for us in the sense of what our national health is like? And one thing I noticed that when people talk about the stock market, they also talk about it kind of as if it was a person. Like they'll say, today the market rallied, meaning that the market did well. Or they'll say, the market reacted, or the market got jitters. Which is evocative, but it also creates a situation in which the market starts to sound like a person. And the market's not a person. It's not this thing outside of us. It's actually something that we're all part of. So thinking about that, I wrote a whole bunch of poems in which I personified the market. So the market actually became a character, and I'll read some of those tonight. And then I was also thinking about how the economic crisis was being defined in many ways in terms of the stock market indices. The Dow crashed. This was really bad. I'm a poet, but I understand something about economics, so I get that I have a pension, and that the institution I work for, which is a public institution like this, has investments, and they're all impacted by the stock market. But it also felt really indirect and somewhat mystical. So I wanted to try to write poems that had, could capture that feeling, the feeling that I had of that relationship. So I started recording the closing number of the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and then I would take that number and I would put it into sometimes just random search engines. Sometimes it was an online version of Paradise Lost. Sometimes it was Bartlett's quotations online, and I would let the number generate a text, right? So it would like lead me to a quote, or it would lead me to a line in a poem, or it would lead me to an article. And then I would write a poem for that day that matched that closing number, and I would incorporate that other language that I had found through the stock market. So I was letting the stock market kind of collaborate with me in a small way on some poems. And then I wrote a poem that I thought might imitate a ticker. So I'll read a little bit of that too. It's a poem that kind of runs at the bottom of the page of the whole book, and you can either read it in conjunction with the poem on that page, or you can read it across as a ticker. And then I just started writing stuff about the intersections between poetry and the market, and poetry and parenting. And I'll read a little smattering maybe of all of that for you tonight, and won't say much else besides doing the reading until I get to hear your questions. Okay? All right, set the timer so I don't keep you too long on a school night. I will start with by reading one of the epigraphs from the book, and it's an epigraph from the poet Muriel Rukeyser, and she writes, "When one is a woman, when one is writing poems, when one is drawn through a passion to know people today and the web in which they, suffering, find themselves, to learn the people, to dissect the web, one deals with the processes themselves, to know the processes and the machines of process, plane and dynamo, gun and dam. Towards a poetics of the Tao. Every day has a number attached to it. Great additions, subtractions. This is not just an aesthetic problem. See John Ashbery. There is a, quote, natural impulse toward the boundedness of closure, end quote. The bell rings. Trading stops, but the world is unfinished. Lynn Huginian. Both the rivers and their banks are moving. The poem remains incomplete, the trading day long over. I do not believe if I follow the Tao, I will find nirvana. But I often check the numbers, sit for meditation. Even when we think we are at the end, there are decimals. When the Buddha touched his finger to the ground at the moment of enlightenment, all the leaves fell from the Bodhi tree. It's February 10th, 10:04 in the morning, the Tao falls to 12,194. The present poetic strives towards total awareness, incessant recording. Ravenous as a black walnut tree, roots sucking at the sore line, the Tao touches everything. The taste of our water, color of our sky, torque of our engines. It's February 10th, 10:15 in the morning. The Tao at 12,203 is rising. The poet, like the trash tree, uses all of it. A poem moves as does the Tao, influenced by a variety of factors and events. Mergers, oil spills, revolutions, suffering. Sometimes what does not move tells the story. I like poems that go to prisons and coal mining towns. I like poems that act as archive or a view to Elizabeth Street. I admire circuitry and cosmology. I write with a power industry dictionary on the bookshelf behind my desk, a copy of the King James, a guide to Texas trees. Poems should evidence some degree of control, but poets should be a little volatile. A poem is a high-risk investment, a long-term commitment. Like a big, dirty city, it should make you feel a little uncomfortable. It's February 10th, 1:11 in the afternoon. The Tao falls to 12,197. The poet wants to remind the Tao that the bird has something to teach it about falling and song. The theoretical physicist says, I've always wanted to find the rules that governed everything. The theoretical physicist says, deep laws emerge. I have a friend who asks about truth in poetry. Whenever he does, I want to send him a valentine on musty pink paper. He lives in a mid-century modern house with mid-century modern furniture carefully culled from vintage stores and eBay. He owns an old mahogany stereo cabinet, jacked up so you can listen to an iPod through it. That's the kind of truth in which I'm interested. Plus the silence, plus the static. Charles Olson writes, quote, no event is not penetrated in intersection or collision with an eternal event, end quote. To which I offer this corollary. No event is not penetrated in intersection or collision with the stock market. I wish more poets would write about money. The New York Stock Exchange began when brokers met under a buttonwood tree in 1792, the year that Blake wrote Song of Liberty, the year Shelley was born. Charles Dow created the Dow Jones Industrial Average, representing the dollar average of 12 stocks from leading American industries on May 26, 1896, 6 days after the U.S. Supreme Court introduced the, quote, separate but equal doctrine. Now corporations have the same rights as people. Why can't poems? I nominate Robert Duncan's poem beginning with a line from Pinder for president, Frank O'Hara's Having a Coke with You for chairman of the Senate's Foreign Relations Committee, Gwendolyn Brooks's In Montgomery for attorney general, although the House will not approve it. Brenda Hillman explains, quote, Shelley wants you to visit Congress when he writes, be a violet in the crucible, and when he notes, imagination is enlarged by sympathy. Bernadette Mayer asks us to, quote, show and possess everything we know because having it all at once is performing a magical service for survival by the use of the mind like memory. Blake reminds us, for everything that lives is holy. And then there's this. When you make the poem, you can hear the swish of dollars washing down the store line, second by second. You can hear the stock ticker ticking away. Fareed rests in child's pose on the living room floor. Gianna sleeps in her crib. The Dow closes its eyes. In the park across our street, nothing blooms. Winter grass the color of a lioness, my warrior, my tree. After the fall of Mubarak, reporters talked to tailors on Cairo's streets. They broadcast video of doctors who treated the revolution's wounded. People write congratulatory notes on their lab coat sleeves. We love the look of magic marker on white cloth. But no one tells us how much money we've sent the dictator over the years. How many more receive our checks? There are bigger equations, larger alphabets, scripts from which I want to unwrite myself. In 1994, the artist Mark Lombardi began working on a series of spindle drawings that graph relationships between business and government elites, tracing paths of financial meltdowns and mergers, shady deals and convenient bedfellows. The poem, as well, can spin webs. The archive is wide. The poem accepts yellow leaves, guide stars, a crop failing, my milk coming in. We need the aerial photograph and microscopic slides, as well as something beyond our personal viewfinders. Not a ball and chain of cause and effect, but a tendency towards pattern, implication, investigations of grief and ecstasy. The artist Mark Lombardi worked in pencil. The poem and the stock market welcome speculation. The market scowls, crosses the street against traffic, settles, hovers over a spreadsheet with his administrative assistant as if it were an infant, sleeps in another bed after 3.5 years of marriage, can only sleep in half of the bed after 43 years of marriage, sees a coffin in a shop window, grows nostalgic for shop windows on crowded city streets where men made picture frames, repaired television sets, piled tools in doorways, nursed machines to roast and grind coffee, operated a printing press. The market wants to apprentice, cannot apprentice, looks like a nest in a tree. The market is a parasite that looks like the nest in a tree, howls through the ventilation system, hairless, blind, a newborn calf sleeping on your chest, the curdling market whose milk has come in. The market wonders where the soul goes, decides that God must be a cripple to make the rest of us feel whole, remembers a trip to Mexico when he was just out of college. Oh, the beggars in clown paint. Oh, the girl who never wrote. Jacaranda, jacaranda, jacaranda. Cheap purple leaves dirtying the sidewalks. A street name for revolution. A street name for insurgents. A street named for reform. Nights when church bells rose to Aztec temples, like the soul. At the hostel, she told him, a body must train to hold the light and the spirit. They fucked, listening to the Rolling Stones, burning candles. God, the market loved Mexico and the Rolling Stones. Then the market had kids, and it was all profit margin and technostructure, rollerblades for a few years. Mostly he all but forgot his legs. It must be okay to be nothing but sight for a while. All this over here, that over there, the packing slip, the manifest toes, arches, heels, calves, like his doctor told him. Relax each muscle against all this shimmer. Grass sequined with difference, butterflies trembling like addicts. In a cornfield, a violet is a weed. The market always feels so heavy by the sea, weighted by 1,000 coins. Impossible to sort, to let go without hemorrhage. To lighten would be to dissolve, not like an ocean against a horizon, but to sink from continent to silt, to slam, taking down walls and foundations. Root systems, swing sets, whole cul-de-sacs. The market worries he is nothing but a pile of stones. When he feels so much inside him, slipping in and out of place, and is somehow expected to speak from one throat. In Revelations, the angel commands John the divine, rise and measure. And thus begins a prophecy, a litany of calculations, 42 months, 2 witnesses, 260 days, 2 olive trees, 2 candlesticks. In a singe of data, John, like the physicist, scavenges for God. 3.5 days, 24 elders, 12 stars. For the prophets, to measure is to signify and separate. We diversify, we financial officer. As in the story of the samurai who falsely accuses his servant, Okiku, of stealing one of his 10 Delft plates. His words spreadsheet. She inventories 1, 2, 3, must be 4, 5, 6, mistaken. 7, 8, 9, counts again. Her master will spare her if she fucks him. An equation she refuses. He throws her down a well. A well is a chamber of calculations. An ear, a labyrinth of bone. A darkness so seldom our habitat. Whence Ukiku endlessly counts. 1, 2. My genre is trauma. 3, 4. An obsessive ticker. 5, 6. My genre falls. 7, 8. From office buildings. 9. Ukiku screams. Like mid-level managers in the 1930s. In times of stress, as before a fall, or angel, or robbery, at gunpoint, in the back of a taxi, we see in hyper-reality innumerable pixels. My God, my billfold. A national debt clock ticks off the trillions. Numbers jump and flip. The minute hand slips as a doomsday clock ticks down our fate. Arithmomania, the poet said, his mind burned with numbers. How many bricks in a wall, coins in a purse, glasses on a tray. A hook, a burr in thought to explain why vampires stop to tally beans or seeds dropped on the ground, but a hungry child simply grabs and eats. Our ticker tells a story of national precarity, numerical OCD. John's angel commanded measure. Ukiku screams. My gunman barks, give me your wallet or I'll fucking kill you. To submit to another's accounting is to surrender, is to default in a taxi where I hand over my money, so Google mapped, so market crashed, not counting. know thyself, the oracles.